We are seeing more fallout from President Trump's sudden decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. That was the last straw, reportedly a cause of the departure of Defense Secretary James Mattis. Now, the Mideast, it's getting thrown into even more turmoil, that and the ripple effects being felt all the way in the Far East. Now, Mattis, he'd worked to make sure that tensions didn't boil over with China, especially in the South China Sea, where the Chinese have been building up their navy. Mattis was also considered a voice of reason when dealing with North Korea. Now that's gone, and another check on Trump gone with it. And I want to read a portion of an op-ed that was in USA Today, and then I'll introduce you to the author of the piece. And this is a portion of it. Quote, "The chaos that finally cemented Mattis' decision to leave, including the president's snap decision to abandon the Middle East to the Russians and the Iranians, confirms the worst fears of Trump's most dire critic. No Secretary of Defense has ever resigned in public protest. Mattis, a man with a deep sense of history, knows this and therefore knew the gravity of his decision, and so we must assume the worst about the utter meltdown inside the White House." Tom Nichols, he joins me now. He's a professor at the U.S. Naval War College, and a lot to unpack, and I want to go around the world here with you a little bit, but just really briefly to the trip that I touched on in the last segment. Just the premise that you sit in front of our troops and say we're suckers of the world because we're not being properly compensated by our allies. You don't even have to be a history buff to remember what at one point we believed in with the Marshall Plan and how it paid us over 100-fold and cemented who we are. But to say that in front of rank and file and then to lie about raises you're giving them, I saw Admiral Kirby called it unconscionable, but this is so not normal. Tom, you know, I almost feel like I'm beating it to death, but if you almost ignore the just non-presidential nature of it, it almost somehow, I don't know, mitigates it. And it just was unseemly.
It's definitely weird, and I should point out that I don't speak for the War College or the Defense Department. It's not the kind of thing that you say in a speech before the troops. Now, presidents complaining about allies not carrying their share of the burden and complaining about, you know, alliances and America having a disproportionate burden, that's normal. I mean, that's something that presidents have complained about for a long time. But it's not the kind of thing you complain about over the holidays to the troops far away. It's just a very strange choice, and I suspect that, as with most things the president does, it was off the cuff or extemporaneous, but it's definitely unusual and doesn't really send, in my view, it doesn't really send the right message, which is that we care about you, we're here, we're thinking of you, we're praying for you. It's not really a place to air political grievances, but you know, the president goes in the direction he goes in at will, and that's just how he is.
Now, just please explain better. I've had family in the military, and the whole thing is chain of command is critical. The idea that any president, I don't care the party they're from or their policies on it, wouldn't even consult with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, let alone the Defense Secretary, before they just go rogue on a phone call and say, yeah, I'm pulling out all my troops out of Syria. And by the way, I might start doing the same thing in Afghanistan or anything else. More than just not being normal, there's a reason why no one does these kind of things. I mean, as I understand, even Erdogan was taken aback, even though he wanted us out of Syria. But the recklessness or the impetuousness of it even took him aback, and that says something.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting parts of that story, that Erdogan said, you know, you really should think about getting out of Syria. And Trump said, okay, I'm out. And even Erdogan said, whoa, 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 don't do anything precipitous or crazy here. It doesn't really have anything to do with the chain of command. It's just about making good policy. I mean, the president is the commander-in-chief. He can issue orders and he can do what he wants as the commander-in-chief. That's his Article II power under the Constitution. But that's not a good policy process. There's a reason that the top echelons of the government, including the White House, including the national security bureaucracy, are filled with experts who are experts not just on Turkey and Syria and the Middle East, but on the military, on national security, on terrorism. You know, they're there to serve the president. They're there to serve the national interest and to give the president the best advice they can give. they can't do that if he's not going to ask them, and certainly not if he's not going to listen to them.
It's funny. I mean, you could certainly argue Pompeo, Bolton, they're far bigger hawks than even Mattis was. But you should have a plan. And then talk about what's going on in world capitals right now from both our allies, and then take us into places like Tehran or in Pyongyang or in Moscow, Lord knows, where they see this kind of U.S. in retreat and all of a sudden an opportunity here for mischief, let alone our allies saying, my God, if something happens, is the U.S. going to be here for us?
I don't think it really matters who's a hawk and who's a dove anymore in the president's leadership, because I think the president is making decisions, again, my personal view, he's making decisions based on what he thinks is best for him politically. And so, I mean, John Bolton in particular has had to eat more of his previous words than almost anybody still in the administration. Mike Pompeo, he's Secretary of State. He's got to follow the president's line. What I think is happening in foreign capitals is that our allies feel abandoned. They simply don't know who to talk to anymore. They don't know where the United States is going. And I think what's particularly worrisome about that is that our allies now realize that the only person who matters is the president, that they can talk to the Secretary of State, they can talk to the National Security Advisor. It doesn't matter. If the president tweets or has a phone call, everything that's been said before that, it just will go up in smoke. I think where our enemies are concerned, I think that they will be emboldened. I think they see a decision-making process. Well, I shouldn't call it a process. They see a White House that is basically paralyzed, that is reliant on the president alone for these kind of instant gut checks and judgment calls. And I think that leaves them a lot of space to do a lot of mischief, and I think they know it. And I'm particularly concerned about that.
In fact, I want to read another part of your piece you wrote. America, you wrote, in the wake of this historic and unprecedented resignation, will enter 2019 as a superpower in decline, trying to slink off the world stage. The world's jackals and hyenas already sense our weakness and are circling closer. Our national security has never, not even during the Cold War, been in this much sustained danger. We can only wish strength and moral fortitude to Mattis' successors. They'll need it. But when you go through which people this week are happier than when the week started, you're talking about the Taliban, ISIS, Putin, Iran. I mean, you got to work hard to get a worse rogues gallery of people who say, wait a minute, if I'm Putin all of a sudden, I'm going to look at Ukraine and say, he's not going to do anything. Now's my time to go make a move. The Kurds, my God, we asked them, we pledged that we were going to stand with them. If you're Assad right now, if you're Turkey, you're going to say, open season, I don't have to worry about the U.S. Coming in and covering for these guys. And I can go up and down the line here, but that's a scary set of dominoes that you don't have to wear a tinfoil hat to say could possibly fall sooner than later.
What I worry about is a miscalculation. I mean, it's absolutely true. When Vladimir Putin is calling you by your first name and telling you what an awesome job you're doing, that's not a good week if you're the president of the United States. What I worry about most with somebody like Putin or the Iranians is that they'll miscalculate. They'll say, well, now we've got a lot of space in front of us to run, and they may end up doing something that will end up provoking a reaction from the United States that even the president may not be able to restrain. I mean, that's how crises begin. During the Cold War, we had these moments of intense crisis, but on a day-to-day basis, our enemies, particularly in the Soviet Union, knew who they were dealing with. They knew where the lines were. We had moments of great peril where we either miscommunicated or someone took a gamble. But I think now we are just in free fall, and our opponents are looking to take advantage of that. And I think that really represents a period of sustained danger and peril for our national security.
Tom, I heard Woodward speak recently in an off-the-record event, and he was even more unguarded, if you will, than even in the pages of fear. Everything in the book is probably even worse. I mean, my God, where are the guardrails now? I mean, if I'm a military guy, literally, I mean, this sounds like a crazy. He has the launch codes, and he can do it without guidance. These are the kind of stories people are writing right now, and you're not just some conspiracy theorist to say, wait a second here, what kind of uncharted territory are we going to, especially given all the other mitigating factors of the probe that's coming down, bad poll numbers, a constant refrain to change the subject. Mattis was much more important than one man is what I guess I'm saying.
Right. Now, one thing to understand about the nuclear codes is that's always been true. I mean, it's always been the case that those are the president's weapons. He has the ultimate say over whether or not to use them at any time, 24/7. So there's nothing new about that. I think what has people concerned, obviously, is that we have a much more mercurial personality in the White House. And I think the president's supporters leaned heavily on Mattis's presence as a way of saying, don't worry, there is this very stable presence over at the Defense Department. And now that's gone. So I think, that obviously raises a greater sense of worry. And I think it also undercuts the arguments of people who said, hey, as long as James Mattis is there, you can be sure things are okay. Well, Mattis is going to be gone in just a matter of days. And that letter that he left, tells me, as I said in the USA Today piece, tells me that Woodward's book, as you just pointed out, Richard, Woodward's book is probably not that the reality is probably a lot worse than we just read in that book, and that's a pretty scary thing to consider.
Absolutely. Hey, Tom, I really appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And on that uplifting note, when we come back, now before the Donald became president, he was famous for being famous in New York. He was also infamous for his frankly shady business deals. We're going to take a look back, and it gives us insight into what we're seeing now.